hey, can I have a piece of your candy? And they might say, I don't know. Can you?
Can you?
And
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 99. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. 99. Come on, man.
Is the whole podcast just going to blow up at 100, or are we going to, literally explode into nothingness?
It feels like Y2K a little bit, almost.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen?
We can't have a third column in the numbers. Feels like there should be some kind of party. We should have a bunch of guests or something, but we'll probably just do a regular episode like normal when we get there.
Because we're boring. So we are in week 9 of our cross-training series. We spent 4 weeks talking about faith and all the different facets. Now we're getting into dedication. We'll spend 4 episodes talking about dedication, and the first topic here that we're going to consider is counting the cost, which is a huge thing to cover right off the bat in discipleship.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this week because my job last weekend was to install a new sprinkler controller. Now, this is probably not something you're worried about over there in Indiana with your, 12 inches of snow. But over here in sunny Phoenix, it's like 70 degrees. So I needed to install a new sprinkler controller. And guess how many trips to the hardware store I wound up having to take?
I'm going to say more than one.
More than one, absolutely. I had to take 3 trips to the hardware store just to install a sprinkler controller. And my dad and I don't know if your dad and you also did this, but my dad and I always judge the extent of a project by how many trips to Home Depot you're going to have to take. And so if it's a 3 Home Depot job or a 5 Home Depot job.
I like that. Yeah. I've never used that, but from now on, I will be measuring projects that way.
Because it seems like no matter how much planning you do and how thoughtful you are about the project going into it, like you get into a situation where, oh, I don't have that widget, or whoops, I need to get another pair of pliers, or something goes wrong. You didn't plan for it. You didn't account for it. And thinking about counting the cost, it really is planning for all eventualities, planning for and making sure you've got what it takes to finish the job. Because if I didn't have the right tool, then that sprinkler controller wouldn't have gotten installed last weekend. It just took me having to make more trips to the Home Depot than I really wanted to.
So how many trips to Home Depot is equivalent to discipleship? I mean, this is quite an extensive job, but I like that measure.
And so let's get into our first segment this week, and that is Like the Teacher. And so here we are talking about dedication over these next 4 episodes and counting the cost today. Where is a story where Jesus himself helped people count the cost?
Yeah, the term comes from this discourse that he gave in Luke 14:25-33, where all these crowds are coming to him, and he says a pretty challenging thing to start his speech. He says, if anyone comes to me and doesn't hate his father, mother, wife, children, brother, sister, even himself, his own life, he can't be my disciple. And he goes on to keep laying down these punches. I've been going to this kickboxing gym lately, and they teach you all these different punches. But this is like body blow. These are hooks. I mean, he is throwing this barrage of licks to the people's will to see who is strong enough to stick with me, who wants this enough to follow me. And he gives this story about building a tower. You got to count how much is it going to cost, or else you look like a fool whenever you have this half-built building.
And they didn't even have Home Depot back then.
I've seen half-built buildings. This does happen. Remember after the big building boom out in Phoenix, and there were lots of half-built buildings all over. And then he compares it to a king who's thinking about going to war. Somebody's coming to him with 20,000 soldiers. He has 10,000 soldiers. Can I beat them? Or is the more tactically sound decision to send a delegation and broker a peace treaty? So he lays out these examples to say, think about it. I want you to think before you choose to follow me. And he closes with another cannot. He says, anyone who doesn't renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. So what do you take from these stories?
Well, you referred to them as body blows, and I'm going to refer to them as the impenetrable barrier, because
Oh, I like it.
it seems kind of like he's being very definite here. You cannot be my disciple. He says that like at least 3 times here. You cannot be my disciple. There is a brick wall which we are not able to cross because of ourselves, really. And so the question I'm asking myself reading this, and I probably would have thought this if I was in the crowd too, what is my barrier? If you love your relationships more than Christ, nope, you can't be his disciple. If you love your own life more than Christ, nope, you can't be his disciple. If you don't want to suffer the pain and humiliation of carrying the cross, nope, you can't be his disciple. And then at the end there, if you don't renounce all that you have, nope, you can't be his disciple. And there's so many obstacles here, and he's putting them in our way, but it's all actually within our control. I think it's really comforting to know that no one else can take us from a position of being in Christ to out of Christ, or no one can really impact our standing with the Lord except for us. And Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 8. Neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. When we're in Christ, there's nothing pulling us out, with the exception of us. And I think that's just what Jesus is talking about here in Luke 14. We are the impenetrable barrier. We are the thing that will keep us from being a disciple. It's up to us, really.
I don't know if anybody ever said this to you when you were little. There were these snotty kids that whenever you might ask, hey, can I have a piece of your candy? And they might say, I don't know. Can you?
Can you?
and you were supposed to say, may I have
Correct.
One of your candies? And this is not Jesus saying, if you don't renounce all you have, you may not be my disciple. He says you cannot be my disciple. So I appreciate your emphasis of the impenetrable barrier, because it's not Jesus saying, I don't want you, but it's saying you just can't do it. It is impossible for you to be what it looks like for you to be a disciple. You cannot possibly follow me if you're not willing to pay this great price. And I was thinking about this question of why do we need this? Why would Jesus make such a big deal about anyone who wants to follow him counting the cost? And I was thinking about this book I read years ago called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Have you ever read that?
I haven't, no.
It's pretty good from a business kind of organizational standpoint.
Sure.
But he gives this helpful principle called the Stockdale Paradox. And there's this guy, an admiral, Jim Stockdale, who was the highest ranking officer in a Vietnam prison camp that was called the Hanoi Hilton by some of the soldiers. So he's there for 8 years, and he saw and heard all these different prisoners respond in different ways. I'm sure it was absolutely unthinkably awful for us in our good lives that we have. But when somebody asked who didn't make it out, he said, oh, that's easy. The optimists, people who would say, oh, we'll be out by Christmas. And then Christmas would come along and you're not out. Oh, don't worry, we'll be out by Easter. And then Easter would come along and you're not out. And eventually they just fizzled out and didn't make it. And on the other hand, if you think it's impossible to get out, you won't make it either. But if you think it's going to be easy, that also won't work. It's going to be so hard. It's going to take all of your willpower, but it is also possible. You have to have those two beliefs. And so I think we need to, not just before conversion, but maybe on a more regular basis, steel ourselves for the rough times that might be part of this journey as we kind of balance this faith that God can get us through, kind of like you were saying, that there's a love that will hold on to us no matter what, but at the same time, this hard realism that it won't be easy as we go along the way.
Yeah, I think this is a lesson we're trying to teach our lovely little 9-year-old daughter right now. She, in school, everything has just come so easy for her.
Yeah.
She has always been able to, like, she was reading before she should have been. And all throughout first, second, third grade, things just came really easy for her. And now she's in fourth grade. Obviously, they're doing like remote learning and a lot of other stuff. And she's really struggling in a lot of ways. And she's never before experienced that because the entire time, everything came easy to her. And she never really got that sense of like, you're going to have to put some serious work into this if you actually want to do well. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there. It's like steeling yourself, almost that grit. I know it's going to be hard. I fully acknowledge that. And I'm going to put in the work. And if you've never really had to put in the work before, you never expected to have to, then that's going to hit you square between the eyes and then have to make a decision. Like, am I going to fall away? Am I just going to quit? Am I going to give up? Or am I actually going to do what's necessary to keep this thing going?
Anything really meaningful, anything really worth doing is hard.
Yeah.
You know, we want our kids to know as they kind of dream big dreams, hey, I want to cure a disease. I want to play for the Lakers. I want to do whatever. Like, I want to support you, but I also want you to know it's going to be hard. You have to work at it. You're going to have to put a lot into it, whatever it is, to be a great parent, to have a great marriage, to be a good friend, to have all the things that make life rich, and especially the most important and valuable thing, to be a disciple of Jesus. It's going to be hard. The good stuff is a real tax on your life, but your life is better for it.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into our second segment, and that is Poetry in Motion. So we're in Psalm 17, continuing our way slowly through the Psalms. But Psalm 17 is really interesting because this is, if you go by the subtitles, this is one of the first Psalms that we run across that is labeled as a prayer. He needs God to come in and vindicate him here in Psalm 17. So that's what the whole psalm really is about.
Yeah, I didn't notice the label that this is a prayer of David.
Many of the ones previously have been labeled as psalms, and then the last one, Psalm 16, was a miktam. Now this is the first one that's actually labeled as a prayer.
So he starts out basically declaring, kind of like Billy Joel many years ago, I am an innocent man. That's just a hip reference. You know, the young kids all know.
Oh, yeah. All the youths know about Billy Joel.
Yeah, not Billie Eilish or whatever her name is. So in verses 1 to 2, he basically says, listen to me, Lord. And then in verses 3 to 5, he says, I pass your test.
Yeah.
Which is kind of challenging language for us in our kind of reflective, humble way of approaching the Lord. But I think there's a lot for us to learn here. So it says, hear a just cause, O Lord, attend to my cry, give ear to my prayer from lips free of deceit. From your presence, let my vindication come. Let your eyes behold the right. You have tried my heart. You have visited me by night. You have tested me, and you will find nothing. I have purposed that my mouth will not transgress. With regard to the works of man, by the word of your lips I have avoided the ways of the violent. My steps have held fast to your paths. My feet have not slipped. And a word that jumps out right there at the beginning is just. Hear a just cause. I know you, Lord, are just and righteous, and my cause, David just declares, I know it's just. It kind of reminds me of what we just talked about a couple weeks ago with Job, who's petitioning God for justice. He believes God is just, and he keeps asking him, I know it's not because of my sin that this all is coming about. So what is going on? And David, of course, isn't saying he has never sinned, but he's saying he is innocent of the charges being brought against him. And he knows that at that time he is walking with the Lord in uprightness. And the Bible is very clear that a sinful life is a barrier to prayer. You think about Isaiah 59. And the Bible is also clear that a righteous life is part of our basis for appealing before God. You think of James 5, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much, as the King James language says. It makes me think, am I comfortable humbly seeing myself as walking uprightly before him? Or is it possible there actually are some wishy-washy, borderline sinful areas of my life, or some secret sin I need to repent of, or for some reason I am not willing to say before the Lord, test me, look at me inside and out, look at every decision I make, and you will see right now I passed the test. It's really humbling. It's challenging. You can also, of course, as in many of these Psalms, see a glance forward to Jesus and how prophetic David comes across so many times as he almost speaks like Jesus would speak in some of these things.
Yeah, and I don't know. I get a little bit nervous even using that kind of language, but I don't think he's speaking out of turn here. And I guess the whole point of him bringing this up isn't necessarily to talk about himself. Really, he has a request to bring to God, and that's where he goes on in verses 6 through 9, where his focus changes from his innocence really to God's love and protection. And so in verse 6, you see him basically telling God, listen to me. And in verse 7, show your loyal love to me. And then in verses 8 through 9, basically keep me and protect me from those who want to kill me. And that's the whole focus of his prayer. He is being persecuted. He's being oppressed. We don't know the details of what's going on, but there's some bad stuff happening to David, and he needs God to show his love to him and take care of him, protect him. So here in verses 6 through 9, it says, I call upon you, for you will answer me, O God. Incline your ear to me, hear my words. Wondrously show your steadfast love, O Savior of those who seek refuge from their adversaries at your right hand. Keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings from the wicked who do me violence, my deadly enemies who surround me. And there's a lot you could pull out from this. I just focused in on that apple of my eye phrase. And it's such a poetic way of talking. But as I started digging into this word, the Hebrew word for apple here is maybe more clearly translated as pupil. Like the pupil, like the center part, the most delicate, fragile part of your eye. That's what he's talking about there.
Yeah.
It's the weak, soft underbelly, really that he's dealing with there, that thing that you want to protect and keep safe and is so vitally important. And David is calling on God to keep him or protect him as this really vital part of your eye. And then hide me in the shadow of your wings kind of goes on to that familial sort of like a baby bird underneath their mother's wings, this protection, kind of the same language that Jesus uses toward Jerusalem as he's kind of nearing the cross and in his final moments, just lamenting Jerusalem's abandonment of him. But he's calling on God really to protect him because God is all powerful. And we are weak. We're the baby chicks. We're the soft underbelly. We're the pupil that needs to be protected. And God has the power to protect. I don't know. I was thinking about this afternoon when I was reading these verses. I was thinking about growing up when I was kind of a little baby chick myself. And in my parents' house, I would go and rearrange my entire bedroom. And I used to love putting stuff in different places and hanging different pictures on the wall. And when I was maybe like 9 years old, I hung this picture up on the wall and got the room all set and went to bed that night. And for some reason, the picture decided to just leap off the wall and smash down onto the cabinet below it. And it, like in the middle of the night, just the loudest bang you've ever heard. And so I just book it out of my room as fast as I could down the hallway, like literally running down the hallway. And here's the thing about my family. They were down the hall. They heard it. And as I'm running down the hallway, my mom and my dad are both running down into my bedroom. And like they're going to protect me. They're going to keep me safe. It's kind of this idea that I'm running away as fast as I can out of fear. And here is the protector coming in and taking care of the situation. That's kind of like what I view David doing here. He's like, I'm weak. I need help. God, you take care of this. I'm not going to muscle through it alone. I'm not going to seek advice from others. I'm not going to run away. You're there, and I need you. I need your steadfast love because I'm seeking refuge in you. So it's just a lovely view of his relationship with God and how close they are and how much he really trusts him.
Yeah, I like how you fleshed out the meaning of that apple of your eye, too. I've never thought of that as that sensitive part of your eye. Imagine all the battles he's been in with swords and spears coming at his eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And the people he's seen blinded and that kind of thing. So moving to the next part of the psalm, verses 10 to 12, if David says he's an innocent man, he says these other people are so wrong. And verse 10, they're pitiless and proud. Verse 11, they're encompassing and plotting. In verse 12, they're like this crouching lion. And so it says in verses 10 to 12, they close their heart to pity. With their mouths, they speak arrogantly. They have now surrounded our steps. They set their eyes to cast us to the ground. He is like a lion, eager to tear, as a young lion lurking in ambush. And the word that I look to right away is this word pity. People without pity as he's surrounded. It makes me think of Cobra Kai, no mercy. These people, they're going to sweep the leg. There's no compassion for him. There's no love. There's no willingness to see all of his problems. And up to this point, we've not seen what the problem was. And so many problems in the Psalms or elsewhere might seem vague and distant. And then we realize that just like us, most of these problems are people problems. And people can be arrogant. People can have no mind outside of their own little world and what's important to them. And so they don't have any care for his problems, any pity. And he feels encircled. But we find a steadying influence in the Lord, which is where David turns next, right?
Yeah, this is basically David on the attack, and you almost hear him shout, "Get him!" Like, that's where he goes at the end of this psalm. He says in verse 13 that he wants God to arise and confront this person. He uses the word him here, which seems to imply this is a particular person, but it could be more generic than that. And then in verse 14, he says, deliver me and take their life early. It seems like he really wants them to be punished. And then at the end, there's this shift where it almost seems like David is foreshadowing eternity, which seems kind of an interesting place to go. So let's read these verses. Verse 13, arise, O Lord, confront him, subdue him, deliver my soul from the wicked by your sword, from men by your hand, O Lord, from men of the world whose portion is in this life. You fill their womb with treasure, they are satisfied with children, and they leave their abundance to their infants. As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. When I awake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness. So obviously, David is very angry. He wants the Lord to confront these people. He wants him to arise and subdue them and take them down, really. But at the end, I kind of focused on this last, and maybe this ties into what we were talking about earlier. But he says, as for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. When I awake, I shall be satisfied in your likeness. There's a lot of confidence here at the end. And I sort of view this last verse in kind of like the afterlife concept, or like that he's waking up from death, really, to enter the next life. It seems like that's kind of what he's talking about here, because there's not really any indication that he's talking about like sleeping or anything like that throughout the psalm. But then here, I'm going to see your face in righteousness when I awake, and I'll be satisfied with your likeness. He is totally confident where he is going. If I'm interpreting this verse correctly, it seems like there is not a shadow of a doubt. It's 100%. He knows where he's going. If David was the kind of person who could evaluate his life and know if he was missing something, I think we need to follow David's lead. And obviously, David was not perfect, which is why David is super relatable to me, because he wasn't perfect. He made a lot of mistakes in his life, and yet he was still able to be confident. And if we're missing something, if we're hiding something, then we need to be getting to work and taking care of that so that we can be as confident as David at the end of our life, to know that when we awake, we will see the face of the Lord and be satisfied with his likeness.
Yeah, it makes me think of a hymn we sing sometimes that says, may this journey bring a blessing, may I rise on wings of faith. And at the end of my heart's testing, which David is definitely being tested, he says, with your likeness, let me wake. So let's look forward to the day we awake and are fully like the Lord. And let's walk with confidence until we get there.
That's a good hymn. Jesus, draw me ever near. I'm going to be singing
I love
it
that
now.
song. Yeah.
All right, so that's Psalm 17. And let's transition now into our third segment, which is Through the Week.
I am ready to face any challenges that might be foolish enough to face me.
So every week we focus on 5 challenges throughout the week to help keep us motivated. And so today we are going to talk about 5 challenges that we're going to do, and we encourage you to do with us, all on counting the cost. And so the first challenge we have is a reading challenge. And what verses are we reading this week?
We're reading Luke 14, 25 to 33, which we talked about at the beginning. Matthew 16, 24 to 25. Matthew 19, 16 to 22. 1 Timothy 3, 12 to 13. And 2 Samuel 24, 18 to 24. And just focusing on that last one for a moment, it's this story of David's life. I won't tell the whole story, but it's this story about an offering that he's going to make, an altar on this plot of land. And the point is, he will not offer to God something that doesn't cost him anything. It's important that anything we bring before the Lord have a hefty price tag that says something about our love and devotion to him. We've been studying through Leviticus. I'm teaching a class right now, and we're talking about the sacrifices, and the sacrifices have to be meaningful and have to cost something, and their cost reflects our devotion to him. And I think about gifts that we give to our loved ones. You know, they need to mean something, right? Adrienne likes for me to write something to her, and she knows when I write something really quickly or whenever I put some real thought into it. And of course, we're not called to sacrifice anything in the New Testament except our bodies, you know, except our lives, really, with a constant devotion every day to the Lord himself.
Yeah, there's no re-gifting here. You're not just going to pass along something that somebody gave to you. It's going to take something from you. I think David's example there is just perfect. It's like, I have to pay you. Otherwise, I can't give this to God. There's no way I can sacrifice this. That is the antithesis of the word sacrifice if I just got it for free.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to our second challenge for the week, and that's a reflect challenge. Thinking about maybe introspectively in our own life, asking ourselves the question, what do I still lack? And that actually is a question that Jesus asked this rich man in Matthew 19, verse 20, one of the verses that we'll be reading this week. And I love that story because the rich man is earnestly just asking Jesus, what is it that I need to do? What am I missing? What I've followed the commandments. I've done the things that need to be done. And finally, at the end of it, Jesus pulls out this one important thing he has to do, and that's to sell all his possessions and give the proceeds to the poor. And we don't know if the rich man ever did that, but he sure walks away sorrowful at the end of it. And it seems like he doesn't want to. And when I was thinking about this story, there was a game that did you guys ever play What's Missing?
I don't think I know that one.
When our daughter was little, like super little, we would go to a restaurant when we were still doing such things, but we would go to a restaurant and she would sit at the table, we'd all be there, and she would have us all close our eyes, and she would find something on the table and she would hide it. And then we'd all open our eyes and she'd say, what's missing? And basically we had to figure out what she had taken off the table. And that kind of reminds me of his question. Like, what's missing? Like, what am I missing? And we have to thoughtfully look around and find out what's been hidden or what's been missing, what we've forgotten about. And in our own life, that is a really challenging thing because at least this man has the benefit of Jesus pointing it out to him. Like, here's the key. Here's the puzzle piece that fell under the table. Here's the napkin holder that I've hidden from you. It's like, Here it is. Let me show it to you. But we don't always have the benefit of having somebody point it out so clearly to us. And so it's going to take some thought. Like, what am I missing? What do I still lack? And if you can honestly walk away from that thought process thinking, I've got it all under control, everything is fine. well, then I would love for you to send me an email after this and talk to me about how you did that.
Yeah, and Jesus' response kind of just supports what you're saying. He says, if you would be perfect or complete or mature, if you want to figure out what's missing, if you want to have completion on all of this, then here's what you need to do. Give all your possessions away and follow me. And so that's kind of another way to ask this question. What do I still lack, or what do I need to do to be perfect, to be complete?
For sure.
Yeah. So going from there into our next challenge, which is a request. And that prayer is, fill me, O Lord, as I empty myself before you. It makes me think of what Paul said in Philippians 2:17, where he describes his service as a drink offering, this offering of wine that would be poured out on top of another offering. That comes just verses after he described Jesus pouring himself out. He emptied himself, not considering equality with God something to be grasped. And so you have these dual examples of emptying and pouring ourselves out. And so this prayer to me holds my commitment to give everything and spend myself wholeheartedly before the Lord, but asks the Lord then in confidence to fill me right back up. It's kind of like that picture in Luke 6:38 where you keep pouring things out and God keeps pouring it in. And so it's always overflowing. And the more you pour out, the more velocity there is to things being poured in. So a lot of people are exhausted right now. A lot of people are run down, and you think the cure for exhaustion is to do less. And certainly that's important to think about, hey, am I stretching myself too thin? But usually I find that I become most exhausted when I'm not wholehearted in what I'm doing. And so a lot of times the cure for exhaustion is to be wholehearted and passionate and excited and spending myself on something meaningful. And then I'm enlivened by the very work I'm doing.
Well, if we're bringing up songs, let me bring up that one song where each verse kind of transitions from like this all of self and none of thee, which is exactly the opposite of where we want to be. And then it goes to some of self and some of thee, less of self and more of thee. And finally, it ends up at the end, none of self and all of thee. I think that's kind of what you're talking about here in this prayer. It's just let me be drained out of this equation and let it all be about you. I think that's exactly where we want to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a hard last verse to sing, but an inspiring one.
For sure. All right, so our fourth challenge is a respond challenge, and that's basically for us to take action, and we'll do that by letting go of something that you've been unwilling to let go of in the past. And I really struggle with this, but I think it's all about turning off autopilot. I don't know if you're like me, I'm sure you are, but like there's so many areas in my life where it just seems like somebody else is doing the driving. Like, I'm not really thinking about things. I'm not really considering things too carefully. And too often I just do without thinking or choosing. And I've found a lot of success, though, when I start approaching my choices with a more curious mindset, almost like I'm kind of hovering above my body, watching myself. Like, what is this guy about to do? What motivates him right now? Why is he considering doing this or that? Or what choice is he going to make? And thinking about it more in a curious mindset where you really are thoughtful about what you're doing and why you're doing it. I don't know, maybe that's something that can be helpful for you. But if you just put yourself back in the driver's seat and realize that you are actually making choices, it is, I think, very motivational then for you to start being more thoughtful about the things that you choose to do.
Absolutely. That's one of those keystone habits that drives all the other habits. The last challenge is our Reach Out challenge, where we encourage everyone to ask someone a spiritual question. And so I'm going to ask Brian that spiritual question. What sacrifice are you glad you made for the Lord?
For me, I think the thing that I'm glad that I've given up for the Lord is a lot of unhelpful relationships. Thinking back over the years, I've let go of quite a few relationships with friends and even past girlfriends that just were not healthy and were not helpful for me spiritually. And really, I mean, if I'm honest with myself, I got really dangerously close to the edge of letting some of those people influence my life in ways that they shouldn't. At the time, I didn't really want to let those relationships go. Like, I was deeply invested in these friendships and these relationships romantically with people. When I stepped back, though, and kind of came to my senses a little bit, I realized that I will not be at the place I want to be if I continue to follow these people around. I think the thing that I'm so glad is that I surrounded myself with more godly influences, and that most importantly, I married a godly woman. I mean, that has been the biggest impact on my life. But there was a time where I just couldn't see that as clearly as I do now. And so I'm glad that I was able to let those things go for better relationships and more healthy relationships that came later on.
It's amazing how really most, if not all, of the sacrifices that you think about ultimately end up as blessings.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, I want to hold on to it, this poison that's in my life. I gotta keep it. But you're just really giving up toxicity or whatever, the things I used to watch sometimes, or things that could be time drains on me, or a lot of things could be in that place.
Oh, for sure.
I was thinking of leaving what I thought of as home. I moved around a lot over the years growing up, as you know, and I eventually came to a place where in my 30s, I finally said, you know what? I really think of Phoenix as home. And I had never felt like any place was home, but just mostly the people there really made it home for me. My family, my parents lived there, and then the church family that I love, you lived there, and lots of other great friends and special people. And I had a job that I'd been in for 16 years that I loved, and I loved all the people there. And so leaving home was a sacrifice whenever I decided, after praying for years about, should I do the work of an evangelist somewhere full time, knowing that wasn't available at the time right there. I decided, along with Adrienne, my wife, that, okay, we're going to do this if the Lord opens the right door. And so we took the leap. That was 6.5 years ago, and moved here to Fort Wayne to do this work full time. And it has been just a blessing in just about every way. It's hard not seeing people like you, Brian, all the time. It's been a blessing, but also a sacrifice. But you follow where the Lord leads you. And so far in my life, I'm glad I followed him wherever that has taken.
Well, I'm biting my tongue over here because obviously you're basically saying that you're sacrificing me and our relationship.
I'm happy to put Brian on the altar.
Nobody consulted the Sheely family when you guys made this decision, but no, it's a good point though, because I think so often we think of sacrifice maybe in terms of like letting something unhealthy go or something that's bad go, but then just sometimes it's being willing to let go of something that's good and helpful and just maybe replacing that with something better that can further the gospel and further your influence and lead to bigger and more fruitful opportunities. I think that may even be harder than letting something evil or sinful go, to actually let something that's good and really comfortable go, to get out there into an unknown area and do something that might be scary. So I think maybe both of our sides of this coin are helpful for people in approaching it, maybe from letting go of unhelpful things and letting go of good things that we might just want to stick with.
And in either case, like you say, there's a blessing in the sacrifice.
Right.
I think if we're doing it right, it should be hard. It should be challenging. It should be risky and a little scary, at least some of the time. It should involve sacrifice, but you should also see that at every turn you're being blessed, even through difficulty or whatever might come.
All right, so this has been our discussion on counting the cost. What are we talking about next week on this topic of dedication?
Well, I kind of started getting into it in that discussion about being drained, but we're going to talk about wholeheartedness, sort of taking the pile of chips, if you'll allow a poker metaphor, that are in front of us and scooting them all to the middle of the table and saying, I'm riding all the way with the Lord.
All in. That sounds
all
good.
In.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or at BibleGeeks.fm/99. You can also follow along with our cross-training series on our website as well, or if you want to get in touch with us, we have a contact form there. You can send us a message and tell us about what you want to hear on upcoming episodes. Thanks so much for sharing the show with a friend. We've had a bunch of people talking about this series. We really appreciate all of the listeners and all of the new listeners who maybe have come our way. Thank you for joining us. And until next week, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.